All right, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that you are all here. Welcome to Beyond Sports, our 14 East Public Newsroom that is coinciding with our issue that drops next week, right, Cam?
Yeah, this Friday.
This Friday, our Beyond Sports issue will be out, and that issue is sort of about confronting different perspectives about sports. 14 East isn't usually seen as a sporty publication, but we decided to switch it up. I'm really excited for the issue to come out and to see some of the work that's been done by our amazing staff and our contributors. So this quarter, or not this quarter, this month, because we're hopefully going to have another newsroom this quarter. But this month, coinciding also with Black History Month, we will be having our first newsroom of the year today, Beyond Sports. So welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you all were able to make it. Per usual, this public newsroom is inspired by and in partnership with City Bureau. City Bureau is a nonprofit civic journalism lab serving Chicago's South and West Sides, which brings people together to produce media that is impactful, equitable, and responsive to the public. So our two guests here tonight, I'm so excited to have them in this space with us, are Evan F. Moore and Jashvina Shah. Everyone give us a virtual hand out there in the metaverse. So Evan F. Moore is the co-author of the book Game Misconduct, Hockey's Toxic Culture and How to Fix It. His work over time consists of the topics at the intersection of sports, race, and culture, and is featured in Rolling Stone, Chicago Magazine, Chicago Reader, and ESPN's The Undefeated. His hockey writing was featured in the 2019 edition of the Best American Sports Writing Book Series, and Evan is also an adjunct journalism professor at DePaul University. And then Jashvina Shah is a freelance reporter who has covered sports for more than a decade. She focuses on hockey along with the intersectionality between sports and social justice, and her work has twice been named the Best American Sports Writing Notable. And Jashvina is also one of the authors of Game Misconduct, Hockey's Toxic Culture, and How to Fix It. Welcome
Yes,
again.
I forgot to put that in my bio.
It's totally okay. I'm involved in all sorts of stuff, so I be forgetting to mention everything in my little bio, so I get it. But again, I want to extend the warmest welcome to you from us here at 14 East. And without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So the first question that I want to ask you both is like, what sparked your interest in sports journalism, and who were some influential figures in your early career?
Oh, wow. You
Uh,
want to go first?
sure. I'll go first. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out and listening to us. Hopefully not ramble on about sports and scare you away from sports journalism and all that stuff that goes with it. I guess for me, I mean, my story's a little bit different than most journalists. I didn't start writing until I was like, north of 30, believe it or not. And I was always interested in all these different things, and I just kind of decided to go for it. And I guess in terms of people I looked up to at the time when I first was getting started, obviously people like Fred Mitchell, who's the first Black sports writer at the Chicago Tribune. He was there for like almost 40 years. Some of you all might know him because I believe he's still an adjunct at the school, I believe. Um, People like him, like Lacey J. Banks, who covered the Bulls for a long time for the Chicago Sun-Times. Yes, over time, people I was like really big fan of their work, but Dave Zirin, who's the sports editor of The Nation, who's actually wrote a blurb for us for the book, a back cover blurb. Him. Obviously, folks like Ida B. Wells, you might want to like see that was kind of important where I have a tracer over on my plate. So I started telling it like it is, and just basically telling them, hey, if you don't like what I have to say, like I guess you guys have to be mad, like stuff like that, and so I was always interested in sports. I mean, from a different point of view, like like growing up, I go to games, and I because my mother and father are retired Chicago public school teachers. My first sport events weren't like Cubs, Bulls, Blackhawks, Bears, Bulls, what have you. It was going to CPS basketball games and football games, and knowing how important basketball is to the city here. And a lot of players that I saw end up in the pros. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the movie like Hoop Dreams. I was actually at one of the games that was documented in the film, as a kid. My dad took me to the old Chicago amphitheater. For some of y'all who don't remember what that is, that's basically like just like 39th and Halstead-ish, a little bit further south than that. But yeah, sports always looked at sports as not just like balls and strikes, shots on goal, or touchdowns, or slam dunks. It's bigger than that. I mean, here in Chicago, we have the Blackhawks and the Bulls who play in a stadium that's named after named after an airline company, and the Blackhawks practice at a facility and named after a bank. So it's kind of some of the things that I'll look into. But yeah, I don't want to ramble on. I'll let Jashvina take it from here.
So mine's a little bit long winding. I was born in Boston, but we moved when I was really little. So I was 5. It's relevant because I hated New Jersey my whole life. Now, my parents lived in Cleveland when they moved to the US. So we were raised huge football fans. So we were sports fans kind of across the board, not hockey fans, but football was like the driving factor. And when we moved, I hated it. So I kind of really just like relied on sports, like on those teams, like on the Patriots, on the Red Sox. Like that was my identity. That was my home. And I was just like, when I was like 14, I was like absolutely crazy about it. I would never miss a Patriots game if it was being televised. Like, I'm not kidding. Like I literally at one point, like I was in choir for like all of school, like elementary, middle school, high school. And I skipped a concert because there was a Patriots game and I didn't want to miss it. So with my parents' blessing, I lied and said I had a family emergency. Yes, my parents absolutely sanctioned that. So I loved writing since I was a kid. So I figured, like I never want to miss the Patriots and I love writing. So why don't I combine the two and forever curse the rest of my life? So that's how I got into it. Essentially, I just kind of took it and ran with it. So I went to journalism school. I didn't ever think about what would happen if I decided not to do it anymore. I know people brought up like the money thing, but that to me wasn't an issue. But nobody brought up that, hey, there's a chance that you need a backup plan because you might not like it. So that was kind of interesting to navigate. I think the people who were really influential to me were probably some of my professors at BU, because they helped me a lot, and they were pretty hard on me when they needed to be, but I learned a lot about how to craft a story. But, just looking back at it now, like one of the people that I probably look up to, there are a few people that I look up to a lot. There are a lot of women of color that I'm lucky to know and have the support of. One of them is Shalise Monza Young. So she used to cover the Patriots for the Boston Globe. And that, like when I was in journalism school, like we used to take apart her stories as like a case study on how you write a recap and how you write this and that. So I've always been a fan of hers, especially because, she's a mom and she's covering sports, and you're like, women can't cover sports, and you can't be a parent. Like that was, I don't know if that's still really the case now, but back then, like 10 or so years ago, like that was still the case. So she was pretty big idol of mine. So I had said something about, God, I don't know, something always happens. Something had happened once a few years ago and I was upset about it, and she saw it on Twitter. So she reached out to me and I was like, oh my God, Shalise Monza Young is talking to me. And I was like, so people like her, I'm really lucky to know. And those are kind of the people that have really influenced where I am now. I followed people like Kavitha Davidson, like Shireen Ahmed, and they've been pretty open about speaking up about things that other people don't want to talk about, whether it's things like sports and sexual assault or racism in sports, and just being on Twitter and like for years kind of like seeping in what they're saying has really influenced who I've become as a person, and kind of given me that courage to like take the torch from them and carry it forward. So I would say that those people have probably been the most influential with kind of where I am right now.
Awesome. I really enjoyed both of those answers. So sort of getting into our beyond sports topic, like when you think about the barriers that you faced based upon your marginalized identity, like how have you overcome those? Like I know the age old adage is you have to work twice as hard and be twice as good to get what certain people who don't have, who aren't unmarginalized, may have. I don't know why I'm into my words. White people may have. Um, and so I know that that comes with like a territory that sort of makes delving into the field of sports journalism something that's uncomfortable and something that's new. So how have you navigated that, and how have you sort of overcome those barriers to create something bigger?
Oh, I guess I'll start again. Well, I said it before, like that I started later than most people in journalism start. I mean, like for me, it was a lot of like support from friends, family, wife at the time, and there's people around me that encouraged me because they knew I was kind of up against it. Being a little older, I didn't go to one of the top journalism schools or anything like that, and my niche was something that most people don't hear about or even like explain in any type of nuance. So I mean, I guess it's that and having other people who are in similar situations that are were trying to quote unquote make it or break into the business, and having their support and looking out for each other, and also being involved in organizations like NABJ, and also like reaching out to the people who are in the places that you're at, right? And them being completely honest about it, and them saying like this may not work for you, because every time on Twitter when people like get into like advice about journalism, it just comes into this weird place because we're all coming from all this baggage and all the hurt and pain that we have went through, and we sees all this played on online, and we say this worked for me, this worked for you. And like the one I always see the most is, oh, you don't need journalism school. And 100% of the time, there's always a white male that says that. And we know that our field is dominated by white males, the suburbanites. And there are pipelines on top of pipelines within that demographic. So for them, for those folks to say, oh, you don't need this and need that, like, you speak for yourself, buddy, like, and for me, I mean, so people do look at me as some sort of like success story. I went from someone who was like in the DMs of the people I wanted to have their jobs or be like, and asking them all types of questions like, how do I get in? How do I get down? What do I do? To turn around to people DMing me and be like, hey, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? And I always like preface the information and was like, just because something worked for me necessarily doesn't mean it's gonna work for you. And I always like I stress that all the time, because I don't want anybody to try to copy my path and it doesn't work out for them, because that's setting yourself up some heartache and some failure. But for me, it'll just writing as much as I can and writing about anything I could, even though maybe my entryway was sports, but I did write about other things. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's only interested in sports. Like I grew up in a household with two eclectic parents. Mom was a Trekkie and dad was into holistic medicine and distance running, and growing up in a family where we had family members who were Black Panthers and members of Nation of Islam who were business owners and activists. So I was as a kid like this. I got so much about what was going on not only in Chicago, but the world. Saying those conversations. Family members are educated in one way or another, not just from school, but just even from life too. And I always draw on those experiences, and I always tell people like this: if maybe you're into fashion, or you're maybe into sports or into politics, not necessarily mean that you can write about those things, but also just write about some other things too. And also tell people that like this field it's not for the timid. It can break you down. It can make you question everything that you're doing, and I was at one of the top newspapers around, and I like was felt like some that I didn't belong, like an imposter syndrome like that, and you just kind of have to realize that, you're gonna need outlets. I mean, away from writing and everything else, because you don't want this stuff to, dominate your life, because you put a lot of sweat equity going into it, and you turn around and realize that like you sitting at home worrying about a story or talking about work when nobody's really trying to hear that, Like, so I would say, find outlets, reach out to the people that are doing the things that you want to do. I used to reach out to Howard Bryant and then Dave Zirin and Kathy Cheney and all these people that that were in the field that I wanted to emulate or be on their level in some way, shape, or form. And if they're real about it, they'll give you some straight up like real advice, like so somebody like me, like I said, that didn't like grow up wanting to be a journalist and then just went to journalism school and everything else. I went to the places where I know journalists would be, and got to know some of them and started writing about different things. And like with me with sports, like even though I wasn't quote unquote a beat writer, I'll watch games and write recaps about games and like I try to do everything I could, outside of actually being credentialed and watching the game and covering it in that nature, and also adding a little bit of my background. I mean, we always say, don't be about objectivity and everything else. Like we bring our experiences and our baggage to our stories, and we realize we always tell our editors like why we think this particular story is important. And for me, one of my first stories were for a now defunct Chicago website called Chicago Side, and I wrote about being a Black hockey fan and growing up where I grew up and being a hockey fan and all that what goes with it, and being encouraged about it, and somewhat shunned from people who will see me and be like, I don't know if he's to be part of this, but others from Black folks too felt like, hey, this is why are you doing that? This is a white sport. Like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You know how that goes if you get into involved in things that are quote unquote white or whatever. But you just had that courage and be like, look, I mean, it's something I'm interested in, I want to write about. And then when it gets out there, you find out that all those other people was waiting for someone to speak on their behalf, which is a really, cool experience. But yeah, it's all gone on the topic.
There are two things I want to piggyback off that Evan mentioned. One, the only advice that I think is universal for everyone across the board is that you really need to surround yourself with like really good people and like be very intentional, because the only reason I'm still here is because of those people. Like after I was sexually assaulted, like I lived off these people's couches. Like one of the girls that I'm best friends with is a hockey fan. And the reason we're best friends is because she would ask me every day, she would check in and see how I was doing. And she really supported me. And I cannot, like, I vent, like, that's how I deal with stress. And like, we have a group of there, we are in hot, like, there, I don't know, maybe like 7 of us. Some of us, all of us are marginalized. Some of us are women of color. We have a group and literally we just vent to each other. And it's like, that's how you survive, because the other people who know what you're going through and understand it and can be there to be like, hey, either you need to take a step back and you need to take time for yourself, or you got to push through this and you have to keep going. Like those are the people that you rely on. So that's, I totally forgot what the question was. I get sidetracked very easily. What was the question again?
So how do you as a marginalized person sort of overcome those barriers that might be in your way?
Okay. Yeah. So I also have like, Evan has kind of mentioned, like we have like very different backgrounds. So I went to journalism school. I covered sports while I was in college. I covered men's hockey for 2 years. And the thing about being at BU is that I was really sheltered in the sense that the team I covered had 3 players of color on it. Like at one point there was, I'm trying to think who's there. There was a Hispanic kid, there was a Black player, there was off the top of my head, I can't remember who else was there, but there was always a player of color on the team that I was covering. I was never the only woman in the press box. At one point, I wasn't even the only woman of color in the press box, which is like a complete anomaly to what you would ever see. Like, that's not how things are, but that's how I, kind of came up through the system. And so it didn't really occur to me that, this wasn't something I could do. And I stuck with college hockey for a while after. So I was a beat reporter for 7 years, which, to Evan's point, like, you will wake up one day and realize, like, what the hell have I done with my life? Which is why I'm not doing it anymore, because forget being like a woman or a person of color. Like, if you're a beat reporter, and if you're a beat reporter for a small team, like, it can be absolute hell. I had a host of terrible experiences with Princeton. It was so small. I knew everyone. So some people that, I really loved their support. And just, I guess, like, man, just, when people know you well, like, kind of try to take, which is why I'm actually not that anymore.
Jashvina, uh-oh.
Oh, she dropped off? Oh.
Oh, yeah. Everyone go take a quick 5. Get everyone out of here at a reasonable time. Jashvina, do you want to just pick up from where you left off answering that last question?
Can't remember where I cut out, but so to go anyway, beat reporting in its own, I think even if you're not marginalized, reporting is kind of hell. So it just makes it worse. But I came through in a very different environment, and like, college hockey is really small. And what I learned like a few years ago when I started being really outspoken about racism and stuff like that is that at the end of the day, people can't tell me they're not going to credential me to games because they need the coverage. So I have a lot of leverage that people who look like me don't normally have. And so I've kind of been like, yeah, I got away with like a lot of shit too when I was at BU and when I was at Princeton, because I just knew everyone so well that like I could do whatever I wanted and no one would say anything. So I kind of just believe that I can do whatever I want because that's what I was taught. So I don't know, like I just have a very different, it's so different to me because of like how I came up through things. But it's funny that Evan mentioned the advice people give not working for you. When I really started to get aggravated about this personally was when I got into a fight with someone I thought I was friends with because they said you should write for free. And I said, that works for you because you're a white man. It doesn't necessarily work for people who aren't. And then he ended up accusing me of calling him racist, which of course I never did. And he blocked me. And then I spent 20 minutes like complaining about it to a player at Doubles development camp. And it was this whole thing. And that's kind of when I was like, this is ridiculously stupid. I've always kind of worked really hard. Like I'm a workaholic. I'm not anymore because I did burn out. So that was kind of the unfortunate side of that. Because when I did cover Princeton, like I was working, I was covering the team, I was freelancing, I was like covering other college hockey, I was covering women's hockey. So I was doing a lot of stuff. And I eventually got to the point where I was like, man, I can't do this anymore, which is why I'm not in reporting full time anymore. So it gets tough. I mean, the best thing I think that you can do is, I don't know. It's hard, and it's not really something I feel like I can give advice on, because I think I just got really lucky in terms of where I was and who I knew. And the fact that I know that there are people in that space, like there are people in college hockey that I know will always leave a space for me. And he's he's not there anymore. Okay, well, he is back actually, but there is I got into a fight after Trump was elected very publicly with a player, with a captain for North Dakota, because he said something. Actually, one of the guys I knew had retweeted it, and he was saying something about like, we just want lower taxes. And it ended up being this really awful fight. And my editor was like, you need to apologize because you're still a reporter. You can't fight with a player online. So I went to the SID and I apologized. And the first thing he said was like, you don't need to apologize. And then he told me, he was like, no matter what, you'll always have a seat here. Like, I'll always leave a place for you. And like, I have people like that. So that's a really big difference between, for my like mental well-being as to whether I'm there or whether I'm going to leave, is that those people are still around. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely answers the question. Like the community you keep is essential, especially like to your reporting, because you don't want to surround yourself with a bunch of reporters that aren't like-minded, or I shouldn't say aren't like-minded, but like don't have similar goals to you. You know, you don't want to work with people who might work against your own interests. Um, so my next question is, in like your opinion, and this is a broad question, so if you need a minute to think on it, please take a go ahead. But what needs to change the most in sports reporting?
People can't hire from their circles. No more nepotism and all this garbage has to go, first off.
Yeah, I could just oppose it with what's going on with the NFL right now in terms of hiring practices is basically the same thing. I mean, people tend to hire the people who is in their circle, as Jashvina put it, and in their pipeline, as I mentioned earlier, and those people don't realize when you keep this little small group of like potential like people to hire or to pull from is rarely marginalized people, and it's something that many organizations are are trying to figure out, and it's a weird place because we we see it play out like so much like this, and especially what happened when Colin Kaepernick, when a reporter happened to notice that he wasn't standing during the national anthem, he was off the side kneeling. And I just remember, I feel like that moment, it was really a flashpoint in journalism, because you had so many people that got it wrong, so that were like, well, he's protesting like during protesting the national anthem, like he was protesting like during the national anthem. There's a big difference. Like it's in that, and you just kind of seeing like, as I'll say this, there's a couple of terms you use it about this. Some people say, oh, they're showing their feet or they're showing their ass or whatever. And you saw a lot of white sports writers. You saw it like put on Front Street who honestly had no idea what to make of black athletes. When when they're not throwing the ball or dunking it or doing whatever, just to see how that was covered. And even seen like recently, and it kind of goes with our class, and he said that we had finished up not too long ago in terms of source audits. Like, for people who don't know, this black hockey player named Jordan Subban who beat up a white player pretty good, because he did like a monkey thing like towards him, and you had like all these people running the cape for this, all these white sports journalists running the cape for this player. It was crazy, because I read this one column and I forget the guy's name or whatever, and like reading it, I'm
Was it
like,
Ken Campbell?
that too. I'm talking about the other one.
There's so many of them.
Yeah, so basically I read the column, and this person is basically trying to cape for the player. And first thing came to my mind from reading it was he didn't talk to any black people, like at all. Like, you're gonna talk about racial issues and mention us in like a meaningful way, you couldn't reach as someone who's a journalist at a major newspaper in Canada, you can't like reach out to the multiple black players are in your country, even in your town, or someone from a university or someone that knows his experience. You know, like it goes back to our class and what the source audit. You know, like when you read a story, someone that reporter or at least the very least their editor should have been like, hey, like do some more reporting on this. Talk to someone who's of that community or a player of that community who knows what it's like to deal with all these things on the ice. And I think I think more journalists need to take need more sensitivity training. They need to take class on African American history. They need to take classes on Latino history. They need to take all these. They need to round up. They need to make themselves better, because if you're going to wade into these waters of player empowerment and activism, you got to know where this all comes from, and you got to have some type of working experience in it, or because you see that so many examples of people that, and not even us other journalists are checking them as the readers too, or holding these folks accountable. And in journalism, sometimes we don't like to be told that we're wrong, right? Sometimes, so and we see how that advice can either be taken, it can be taken in a positive way, or it can be perceived as negative. And so, I think that sport journalists need to get outside their shells and actually meet people, where they're at, because you still see so many mistakes in coverage. And that's why in our class, honestly, at this point, we'll never run out of content for our class, for things for me and Amy to talk about, because there's so much. I mean, we even, text each other and talk about things like outside of class and since the class ended, because there's so much out there of people just getting things wrong. And it goes back to the main demographic of journalism and the limited experience of those folks, and they try to fit everyone into the same box, and it's not right.
Sorry, I'm nodding. I'm just going to keep my video off because it will probably help with my internet connection. Mentioning about the reporters getting the story wrong. I mean, you had hockey reporters walking into locker rooms and asking the players how they felt about the national anthem being protested. And it was like, not only is this not your report, you're completely messing it up. I mean, I think there are two problems, and I think a big problem is look at a lot of the people who are in charge don't want to hire people who are not white, or they don't want to hire. There are people that willfully not, people who are not, people who don't do it because their whole lives they've been like, oh yeah, like it, because it works on a referral basis. Like that's how all jobs work. So the likelihood of getting hired by your resume is highly unlikely. You're going to get hired because you know someone, or because you know someone who knows someone. And that's how a lot of positions get filled. And I mean, these people are not comprised of people who don't look like them, or who think, or who bring the much needed different ideas and things like that. So it's kind of unfortunate. I mean, like what Evan mentioned, I think is really important. To educate the journalists right now, being those positions of power. But again, it's hard, kind of like what we talk about in our book. Like it's hard if the people who are top and run the system are not.
So you cut out again?
No, I'm just done.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so my next question is, what inspired game Misconduct, and sort of like if you could describe the process of like crafting your describe the process of crafting your novel and like any challenges like you faced in writing this book, because I know like interrogating hockey play or the culture of hockey, that is a supreme undertaking, because oh boy, that is a culture that is heavily white, heavily male, heavily cisgendered, heavily just straight, just like it's a very not diverse sport. Like I think there are, I don't know how many active reserve or active players there are in the black players there are in the NHL right now, but
It's just north of 30.
just over 30,
Yeah.
just over 30 in a league with like thou hundreds if not thousands of players. So like where do how did you like situate the stories of like black people and queer people and just all sorts of marginalized identity within this very white culture?
I mean, I guess me and Jashvina, like, we already had a reputation of kind of like, mixing it up in hockey spaces and some of the culture wars that are kind of involved, because you have people who want to work with the NHL and they want to like, they kind of, downplay what's going on, because people only like diversity, like to a certain extent, like, oh, that's nice. Oh, that's cool. But there's also other people, friends and company included, and that frankly, I've heard everything that these folks have had to say, and there needs to be a change, right? And we all knew this going in, because we knew there was an audience for this, because we've written about these issues collectively for a long time. And every time we wrote something about it, people would check it out. You had a section of hockey fans who was like, yeah, we're with this, we get it. But you had other ones who prefer to ignore history and put their heads in the sand. And it's kind of like the whole debate we're seeing right now was like, teaching Black history in schools, or calling it critical race theory, but it's really, I don't know, Black history, and talking about it with nuance. And it's kind of the same way with some of the things me and Jashvina had seen in hockey spaces over time, and putting that together, even here locally in Chicago, where, for a long time, this was a Bulls town, and then the Blackhawks started doing really well. And then you saw that fan base just saying all types of, not as a whole, but a pretty loud minority, at least, like frowning upon the coverage the Bulls would get over the Blackhawks. And you're just like, you're in a basketball city, like locally, hockey is a niche sport, a suburban sport, and so it doesn't, even with ratings with sports talk radio, they'll straight up tell you, like, talking about hockey for extended a period of time just doesn't rate, and so you saw that, and you saw like this thing where players like Derrick Rose and LeBron James were deemed like, it was like, LeBron James and Derrick Rose is like up their story, their origin stories, and and they worked pretty fucking hard to get where they're at, based on with LeBron, who grew up in public housing, 60-year-old mother, and then came back and puts all his friends on, creates a school, married the same woman as all his kids, and then Derrick Rose, who grew up at, who would literally pay for funerals of gun violence victims in the city. And then you have these folks looking at them and saying, oh, they didn't work hard. They're flashy. They do this, they do that. They don't do things our way. And you see it where Patrick Kane, with all this, all those issues and everything he'd done, it was always locally, it was viewed as, oh, he's just a kid, but a Black player like exists, he's a thug. And you're just like, where's this coming from? What's all this about? And we wanted to explore these stories, and the thing is like, they're not a source of content of I'm just without say this, and fuckery and foolishness in hockey. There's not a source of it. We had to turn stuff away because there's so many. Like, stuff out there we completely forgotten about, but I always tell people like we turn in our manuscripts in January of 2021, and so much has happened in hockey since then. Like we didn't even get to the Blackhawk stuff because that came out like in the summer, and then the other stuff. And right when the book was going to publish, we found out, who's at the center of with Kyle Beach and everything else, and all these different issues. And it was like, y'all are just creating this content for us. Like we're not doing anything. You just mad because we documenting it. Like, but you all are basically are giving us this content. So there wasn't a sort of thing to write about. I mean, along the way, it was like when you kind of read it, in particular, the information is jarring because it's just so much of it.
I think a lot of it too is that it's so hard to explain. Like the same things keep happening, or people keep asking the same questions, like, how do we stop this? Or the same things keep happening and the powers that be are not addressing it or fixing it. And eventually just got to the point where it's like there's only so much that one can say in a Twitter thread. And it's annoying to keep saying it over and over and over again. And it was like, in order to fully explain, why this happens and how to fix it, you need something longer than an article, and you need something longer than like a Twitter thread. So that was like a big thing with this book. It's like, one, the solution is there. You're just not doing it, whether because you're an idiot or you're just racist. One of the two things. But the solutions are there, and there are things that can be done. And a lot of it was that, like, I would sit down, I would be like, this happened, like use the Chicago Blackhawks or just any example within, because USA Hockey is just terrible. They're terrible. But if you take an example of, a youth player being sexually abused, like this is why it happens. There are literal guidelines everywhere. There have been forever for anyone who works with a youth serving organization, how to prevent abuse. The guidelines are there. This is why it's happening, because you didn't implement these guidelines. This is what you need to do to make sure it doesn't happen going forward. And it's like, you can't really explain all of that and the way that it needs to be explained in a Twitter thread or even in just an article. And I think even with this book, because there was so much to put in there, that it's hard to give everything the amount of space that it deserves to really be told. And I think that was hard. Like you'll use like one or two examples, and it's like, this example is only like a paragraph. Like it's more impactful than that, but there's just so much that happens that like not everything can fit in here. But you need that space to be able to really go through, like, you have this culture. This is why you have this culture. Like culture is a big thing is like the structure, and explaining how the structure works, because that's exactly how people get away with not taking responsibility for what happens. Even if you look at, my God, what's his face? Was it Reed Boucher? Like, even if you look at him and what happened there with USA Hockey, that reporting structure is so screwed up. Who's responsible for making that judgment call? Who made that call? Who knew about it? Like, it's all very messed up, but like you have to go in and explain that. And like that was part of like the purpose of this book, is to really go through and like, this is what it is. This is why it happens. These are the examples, and this is how we fix it. Like you need a lot of space. And also it's nice because now when someone's being an idiot, you can just be like, read the book. Like, I'm not going to rewrite this for you 8,000 times because it's stupid. We go through the same thing literally every single time something happens. Like, we went through this with the whole Austin Watson thing and the domestic violence, and we go through it all the time with the NHL, where they've literally gone out and said that they will not institute a policy on sexual abuse or domestic violence or anything like that. And we keep going through the same thing because they refuse to do and it's just like, one can't keep saying the same things over and over again. It's like, I'm tired of repeating myself. Ugh.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, especially like discussing like the policies on like domestic violence, like thinking about what's his name, who used to play for the Sharks, Evander Kane, and like how he was literally terrorizing his wife and like in this woman's house with a gun, and faced like the sanctions and the suspensions that he got from the NHL weren't for abusing his wife and causing that woman so much pain. They were for betting it or for intentionally losing games. They were for gambling. So they cared more about, in that moment, their property and the loss of money that they had than that woman and her well-being. Like, at the end of the day, it's all about that. It's all about green. Like, yeah, there is a lot of racism because the only color that they see in hockey is green. They want that money and they want that revenue, and they don't want to take care of the communities that they're going to impact and the people that are going to be impacted by them not reining in their players and not reining in their staff. I could go on for days and days about that, especially like in the wake of everything.
That's what I mean.
The Blackhawks, like, and the abuse scandals that are coming out, because like that's an absolute dereliction of duty. As an organization, you have a duty to protect your employees. Like, even not even on a hockey level, you work a job, there's an HR department. There is someone you can go to, or some place that you can go to report misconduct and report like something that is deeply traumatic. They don't have safety nets, and you also have to consider like these are all straight men. Like, a man abusing another man is quote unquote not something that happens in their minds. So it's far-fetched for them, and they don't want to institute these policies that would protect people. And it's so just like, it's infuriating because nobody should go through what that man went through. And especially like having it blasted on a world stage, like it just shows like I never want to watch another Blackhawks game again. Like, I don't even want to give them that revenue because what are you doing with the money that you're bringing in? You're paying people, yeah, but like you're paying the wrong people that are doing continual misdeeds against somebody that you are employing. It's just, ugh, it's intense.
It's worse because they just kind of like, I mean, like the town hall meeting was just a disaster. And there's no one, the NHL is not going to do anything because no one's telling the NHL to do anything. And like you mentioned, unless the sponsors start pulling their money,
Jashvina, you cut out again.
Let's go out again. Yeah, to kind of piggyback up that point, when like, yeah, when I read the oh, so you talking? Oh, yeah, I was saying like once I read that report about what happened, the Jenner Block report, and I guess the first thing in mind was they're covering up for a video coach. What are they doing for players? And also this coach got recommendations from the team and went to another place and did the same thing to another young player. And I think that what needs to be talked about is the power dynamic in the sport. I mean, this is someone who said, like, hey, if you don't go along with this experience, you're not gonna play in the NHL. And they know that's the thing where it's like when young hockey players, only thing their main goal is to go play in the NHL, to go play in the show. As someone says, I mean, a person of power is able to threaten you with that and say they can take that away from you. You're gonna get backed into a corner and have to go along with an awful experience, fortunately. And that was kind of like thing that I noticed from the whole thing, and especially with the town hall meeting that Jashvina was saying, like this, you had like a team chairman, wanting to talk about something else and move on from it. As you can see, when Kyle Beats finally, revealed himself and spoke about what happened, he's never going to be able to get over that. Like, it's not something you get over. It's like it's something that's completely awful, and for this team to say, like all the stuff they're doing and say hockey is for everyone and say all these things, all these catchy slogans and phrases and everything else. But this is a young man that was holding that in for a very long time. And maybe I hope one day he finds some sort of peace in his, I'm glad he's even still playing the sport, because stuff like that can make you not want to associate with anything has anything to do with that team or the sport or anything like that. Though the fact that he's still even playing and was willing to speak about what happened to him, to show to how tough a person he is and other folks, and to even talk about these issues, because people, we not saying, we're just trying to be negative about things, and you obviously get people saying like, oh, why you even like the sport, or in my case, why is your daughter playing if you know all this stuff is happening? And I always tell people like, look, man, like, these issues are in other vocations. They're in journalism, they're in law enforcement, they're in academia, they're in education, they're in every vocation or a job you can think of. These issues are permeating.
Jashvina, do you want to jump back into what you were saying?
I don't even remember what I was saying. No, I think it's just like, I think I was just talking about there's no accountability from anyone anywhere. And it's just very tiring because, what happened with the Blackhawks is a perfect example, because every step of the way they have like done the worst thing they could possibly do. And it would be so simple to just even, forget changing things internally, but what you say outwardly would be such a simple thing to do. Like, I know that I guess the Blackhawks are still looking for a communication / PR person. I don't think anyone's going to want to take that job, but it's just, you can't even be bothered to like say the correct thing. And then there's the NHL. The problem is that Gary Bettman was hired, but he works for the owners. So the owners don't want things to change. So he's not going to change them. So it's not even like you can replace him and then be done with it. It's all very, I don't even know how to describe it anymore, but like watching the fact that the Blackhawks, that like after everything that has happened, it is very clearly evident that the Blackhawks have not learned anything. And I don't, there's been zero attempt to hold them accountable. There's been zero attempt to fix things within the organization. And you cannot have something like that happen and just say, yeah, you're still allowed to operate as is. Like, that's unconscionable to me. Like, you don't have to shutter the franchise forever, but they absolutely cannot be operating right now, because they have ruined people's lives and they have done nothing to change the way they are operating moving forward. And I cannot believe that it's so unconscious. It's mind blowing to me. Like, I can't imagine that that's being allowed to happen.
Yeah, it's disturbing, especially as somebody who, I'm a Penguins fan, but I'm a Chicago emigre, and I have followed the Blackhawks, not intensely, but you check their scores, check where they are, and like, I can't. I don't want to. I don't want to remind, because I feel like it's a consistent reminder that like, this is a space that is not safe for victims. This is a space that is not safe. It's not a safe, like, I hate the term safe space, but it's really not a space where people can feel protected and can feel like, if I am attacked or if I'm assaulted, my assaulter will face repercussions. So like, how, I guess, and this is a question that we don't have to answer, this is for them to answer, like, how are they going to hold themselves accountable, and like, what does that accountability look like? And really, there is no structure for it, because they've built their organizational structure so that there is no room for anyone to be held accountable.
They know they can get away with it. And the fact that they got in a room and they had that conversation where they said they were not going to do anything because they wanted to win the Stanley Cup, they knew they would get away with it. The reason that the Wirtz family can get up and say what they said at that town hall, they know there won't be any repercussions. The way Gary Bettman can say that he's not counseling a minor who was impacted because the Blackhawks gave Aldrich a positive reference. There's just, they know. And you mentioned the Blackhawks. Blackhawks are literally built on this shit. like Patrick Kane. I mean, instance after instance, like they know, and there's nobody unless sponsors start pulling money, and fans just stop going at all, which isn't going to happen. Like there's no, they know they're going to get away with it.
What a world we live in. But so on a lighter note, what is your writing process like? What is that like? Walk us through the ideal writing session for like one of you or for both of you.
Agonized and endless pain. I'm just kidding. I usually I'm kind of changing how I do it a little bit now, but I was always really bad at organizing. So I used to take the quotes from the transcript and I would just paste them in wherever I thought they should go. Now typically like I work in like really piecemeal. I freelance. So the things that I have to do are not, they're more featurey types and they're not due right away. So I have some leeway and I have some time to play around with it. So usually I'll like scribble down an outline on a paper somewhere, and then I'll type up the outline, and then I'll kind of pull quotes as I see fit there. And I kind of just like, I've gotten a lot better at not relying on quotes. So I'll kind of just like paraphrase as much as I possibly can, unless I think something's really impactful. And I'll kind of go from there. I mean, it varies. I feel like just between COVID, I feel like after writing this book, like I haven't just been writing a lot. For the book, I do remember it was literally pages and pages of quotes that we had to go through. And that was the worst part, is like at the very end, before we were submitting the manuscript, I had left like pages and pages, like the end section, like how to fix it. That was all like just quotes from people. And it was like pages and pages of quotes. And I had to go through and like break them up, paraphrase. And it was like horrible. It was an absolute nightmare because it was so much content. So that's usually like how I work. And then I'll just like chip at it until it kind of gets polished to where I think it's supposed to be.
And I guess with me, I had information already before I even started the book, or even there was even a book idea, because you're a freelancer. At the time, you have all this information that goes in the story, but also, just kind of sitting there in your drafts and your emails. And it's also stories from people that will send you things like after you've already written a story, what have you. So I had like a working document already, kind of. And I guess with me, like I'm one of them people that, like I try to like not spend a whole lot of time in front of my laptop for hours. Like I'll purposely like, charge my laptop and then like uncharge it. I mean, unplug it. That'll like, keep me in check of letting it run down. And also I do like a thing where, because at the time when I was writing the book, I was still at the Sun Times and obviously writing the book, but you also have your beat and all your responsibilities. And also when you have a young daughter running around and everything else. And, I was always of the mind, like I'll write 1 hour in the morning and then I'll write another hour in the evening. And, like maybe for a couple hours, on the weekends, but never like, because I was always one of those people, like I sit down and I like, get in my bag about writing, and I'll be there for like, sit there for like, you look up and it's like 3 hours later. So that was all about pacing myself. At times I took a couple weeks off too, like we had a deadline when the book needed to be, and I knew like, hey, if it's okay if I take a couple of weeks off or a day off or whatever, not gonna hurt anything. I'm not, not gonna feel guilty because we have, and plus, writing with someone. So I'm not saying, that, like we both had chapters that we both did, but also there's a couple of chapters where frankly the subject matter was a blind spot, and then, but also to say all that to say, like, just like pace yourself, because you don't want to get too frazzled, because I've seen stories of people who, oh, they got their book advanced, and when the publisher asks for, hey, where's the manuscript, and they don't have it, because for whatever reason. So I know that wasn't going to happen with me, but I would say, pace yourself and work on your time management if you want to write a book, because writing a book is not for the timid.
Yeah, I was procrastinating starting for like a really long time. I think I was like July, I kind of just didn't do anything. And like Evan like was able to kind of push me along. So that really helped. I think it was just like between COVID and everything else, and like just the subject matter was like overwhelming for me to start with. But then also like a smart ass, I got a puppy in September, which don't ever get a puppy when you're trying to write a book because you can't do it. She had to be watched constantly. So like I lucky, like I would just give her to my parents for like an hour. I'm like, you need to just sit with her and watch her because I have to do this. Like it was really hard because she's just like, they're crazy. She has too much energy. She eats everything in sight. She requires constant attention. And like I had to just not, I couldn't be in the same room with her. And it was really hard to like manage the two. And then at one point I sprained my wrist and it was like really bad because I was like, kind of like, now I can't really type. Like I'm trying to type with the braille. Like it was just disaster. But I think like, I think the benefit was that there were for my sections, most of them I knew pretty well. So once we started, I feel like it was easy to get the momentum going. I think it was hard to start because I'm like, I have a lot of anxiety. And I think like the prospect of starting is just very overwhelming to me. But that's why like it's also really helpful when you're writing with someone because then Evan would be like, hey, I'm doing this, or because like, how's this progressing? And I'm like, shit, I need to write that. So it's like I have to do it because it's not just you, like, you know, someone else is relying on you too. So like, sure, you can let yourself down, but you can't let someone else down. So that was helpful in terms of like thing going too.
Thank you. So my last question before we get to our audience, is what advice do you have for up and coming writers?
I would say if someone gives you the time of day to speak to you about themselves, their family, or what they're doing, you should be honored. Like our time is precious, and if someone, you know, spends a couple minutes talking to you or invites you into their home and you're telling their story, because you know, back when I was with the newspaper, you know, I was writing features. That would happen pretty frequently, and I always would tell them, like, you know, thank you for setting aside time to speak with me, because nobody has to really talk to you about anything if they don't really want to, you know. And I'll say that, and you know, write with nuance, you know, write with care. Like you didn't, you're we have we have a power as writers and journalists, and you know, we used to be spending more time using that power for good, because like we're writing about people's lives, like, or their livelihoods or themselves or their families, and it's personal for them. So we should do what we can to make sure we write with care, we write with nuance.
Kind of piggybacking off of Evan's point, this is kind of something that would vary depending on what discipline you're going into. I think you have to treat everything with a lot of care. I was a beat reporter, so I learned pretty early on that like you can't mess around because people will call you out on your bullshit if you mess up, which was a good lesson to learn, because I think there's like a misconception that like it's journalists against their subjects, like we're fighting each other, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Am I frozen again? Okay, good. It's like nobody's moving. So that's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to work with your sources and the community that you're a part of, and you have to be fair, and you know, you have to lay down the law where it needs to be laid down, but you also have to understand that like just because something's a good story doesn't mean that you should tell it. I once had, oh gosh, this was, I don't know, 4 years ago, I was doing my postseason coverage, so my postseason prep coverage. And I was talking to a player and who had come back from some leave of absence, which wasn't really talked about what it was. And I was interviewing his dad, and his dad told me that like basically he was struggling with depression and all that. So that's a good story, but his dad volunteered and he didn't tell me. So I went back and I called him and I asked him and I said, do you want me to publish this information? And he said no. And I respected his wish. And, you know, you shouldn't send your stories to your subjects, but like, you have to understand that like Evan mentioned, like you have power over people's lives. And, you know, it's not your information to tell, it's theirs, and they're entrusting you with their information, and you have to be fair about it, and you have to really think about it and what you're doing. And I think that that's a lesson I kind of learned with time. But when you're a beat reporter, like there's a lot of those dynamics, because you do know everyone really well and they know you. And, there are times when people be like, you can't write that. And it's like, no, I can, I'm within my right and it's fair. And there are other times where there are things that you just shouldn't write or you shouldn't share without permission. So yeah, I would say definitely be very cautious about that. The other thing is like have a backup plan because you never know, you might decide that you don't want to do it. Or, like for me, one of the services that I have is that I don't full time. I have a job, which at any point, if I want to check out, I can. And that's been really, really helpful to me because there are some times where I'm just like, I don't want to deal with sports today. I don't have the capacity and I don't have the bandwidth. So it's good to have something that you can rely on. So later on in your life, you're like, all right, this is a career path that I might think I want to go into, or that I want to do both things together. Like I wish, because when people told me like, oh, you should have a backup plan, they were like, you might not make enough money, but the money wasn't the problem. The problem was like, at one point I was miserable. I didn't have a backup plan because no one told me I might be miserable. So not to say you'll be miserable, but it's good to think ahead.
Okay, thank you guys so much. So now I'm going to open it up to the audience. If you just want to raise your hand and ask your questions. Ava, I see you first, so go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, hi. Thank you both for sharing. It was all really interesting. I don't really specialize in sports at all, so I love hearing about how like the other side of things works. Since you guys both worked on the book, what is starting the process of writing a book like? I'm very interested to know, aside from taking care of a puppy.
The first thing I think that Evan and I did was, we had the idea like a while before we signed the contract. So I'm trying to think. So initially what we did is like, we have this master list, like a spreadsheet where we just dumped all the instances we could think of, all the articles about racism, sexism, homophobia. And it really was only for the past like 3 years because there was just so much stuff in the past few years already. So that was our starting point. And I think in the back of our heads, we knew people that we want to talk to, whether they were reporters who were, really leaders in their field when it comes to covering sports and things like racism and sexism, or if there were, certain books that we thought would help us, or, certain people within the industry that we knew we should talk to. So that was kind of where we started. And then it was just like, just reaching out to people. And for a lot of the people I knew, most like, I don't think there weren't that many people that I was kind of like cold calling. There were a couple, but not too many. So it was pretty much gathering the interviews. And then from there, we're lucky that it kind of lent, the structure was a little tricky, but like for the most part, separating the chapters into the topic, it kind of lent itself to an easier structure. So it was a little bit easier in that sense to kind of write it.
Well, I guess for me, it was kind of thinking of like what we're going to embark ourselves on and how we saw the book. I mean, well, Hockey Book, has 2 Black women on the front cover as the forward writer and as the front cover blurber, right? And also opens up with a quote from Fred Hampton, not many, right? And so, I was always thinking of like, what I wanted to accomplish with this, and taking, like Jashvina said earlier, we've written about these issues in hockey for a long time, and I've written about it in various publications, and whether it was like columns or interviews or what have you, but we wanted to kind of take that to another level and have like it's all like encompassing, like living, breathing documentable book that shows like this sport has hella issues and it needs to be fixed sooner or later. So I guess in terms of like the writing process, it's like a lot of stuff we already knew, and and I did some cold callings with some folks, but a lot of it, there's people I just already knew, like like I knew like knowing like, the way hockey operates in terms of best hockey journalism, in terms of if you get like one thing wrong, like misplay a player's name or or miss something, like it's kind of known people are going to get after you and be all over you about it. And we wanted to, we didn't want to provide, we wanted to like leave no doubt, when we wrote this book, because there's so many people that say, oh, hockey player don't do this, hockey player don't do that, and all this stuff. And you're just like, well, there's all these, it wasn't just like anecdotal stories. It was more, it was a lot of, we had a lot of like, like studies. It's like we called it some studies. We called it all the like different like articles and other things, and to show the back of our point. So we were like, we have all this info to back ourselves up. The writing will take care of itself. And when by the time we, like got down to it, we were like way over like the word count, and we had to start cutting and slashing, So yeah, so that's a good problem to have when you get to that point.
Yeah, so I think too, like Evan mentioned the studies, like some of the research that we did was getting those studies. I public library access that I apparently is still valid, to kind of look through the databases they have and search through through academic papers for things that would mention, so I could have more of like trying to think of what to say, not more, but like something substantial that's like, this is what the study says, this is what's recommended. I also like relied on, I have a friend who's a lawyer and was working on some stuff, and she's out with me for 2 hours we tried to like look for budget issues with Hockey Canada for like 2 hours, like, because one of the things that we looked at was like, this is how much they're spending for women's hockey. This is even what they're calling it in the budget. Like Hockey Canada had slashed their budget for bullying and hazing by quite a bit. And their reasoning for doing that was that they had updated guidelines, but we couldn't find copies of that anywhere. So usually like, once we talk to people, like they'd be like, hey, you should look into this, you should look into that research or this study or something like that. So a lot of it too is like when you have the initial list of people that you want to talk to, or you have the initial list of stories that you have, then from there you can kind of branch out to the next point. So I don't know if they still say this, but there's like that thing, like if you're interviewing someone, you ask them like, hey, like, are there 3 other people that you recommend I talk to? So, things like that. Is there anyone else that you recommend that I talk to? Like, are there any books that you would recommend that I read? Things like that. We also had people coming to us because we used our social media as well to see if anyone was willing to talk to us. So we got some interviews and sources that way. And yeah, hockey is a really small community. So I think it was a lot easier for us to have a handle on it because, yeah, it was a lot of information, but for the most part, like we could pretty much get anyone we needed to talk to.
Are there any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, I'll just pop right in. So I have 2 questions. One's a pretty quick first one, but how did you, sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Claire Mallon. I'm a journalism student at DePaul, and I am one of the engagement editors at 14 East. It's really nice to have you both with us tonight. This conversation has been incredibly insightful. But first, how did you 2 meet and then take a very forward step to decide to write a book together?
Evan, you want to tackle this?
Yeah, this is usually my question when I answer this. And like, yeah. So I guess we noticed online that the Jashvina was like, we were like-minded and saying a lot of stuff that I was thinking, and like we were kind of in a group with these other like journalists who talked about sports and intersectional issues, and I had been on her podcast or whatever. And literally at the same time, in my head, I was like, I want to write a hockey book. And I remember seeing her tweet, like basically saying, like, hey, someone wants to pay me to write a hockey book. And I reached out to her and it was like, DM'd her, was like, hey, like I saw that tweet. I basically said I was literally thinking the same thing. And let's like, what do you feel about how you feel about collaborating on this? And still with it. And it's kind of started that way. I mean, we've seen each other in person before she came to Chicago for the book and everything. Like once, I was as
Oh,
covering,
wow.
I was covering. It was the Frozen Four. It was in Chicago that particular year. I was like writing about the games for the Daily Herald, and she was there for college hockey news. And like, when you see Cam, okay, wow, Cam with all the big questions. Okay. Sorry. As I was like hanging out in the media area, I saw Jashvina. She was actually curling her hair. Other people are sitting around playing with their phones and whatever. She's sitting there like curling her hair and getting ready to, to work. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, okay, so my one other question is from my dad. He is a lifelong hockey fan, St. Louis Blues fan his whole life. I think 2019 when they won was the happiest he's ever been, like in his entire life. And for his birthday, I got him your guys' book, and he's been reading it and really loving it. And he unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. He really wanted to make it, but he did send me a question to ask you guys. So he wants to know, in your opinion, do you think the book has had any impact on the practices or guidelines or anything being implemented now in the NHL?
I was gonna kind of like paraphrase one of the book reviews on the book that someone had written. And unfortunately, like the people who probably should read the book probably won't, because they're aware of my reputation. They're aware of Jashvina's reputation, and they'll see this book and write it off. Because I remember when we first put out the tweet, like, "Hey, we're writing this book. We're doing this." Of course, the hockey culture stands. Like they literally judge the book by its cover without the even book being out yet. And we kind of knew, like, hey, like those people are gonna be out there. They're gonna be lost. That's cool. That's them. But over time, what I say that it changed anything in NHL, I don't know. I don't think so. At this point, I don't think it does. But I know they're aware of it. Like teams and players and they connect with NHL. I know they're aware of the book. So they can't, front on that point. But there's been people that have reached out to. I know that it was like this for Jashvina, but there's been people out there where they've reached out in the book where they're instrumental in changing their minds about things, which is what you really want. I mean, you want people to confront their thinking and realize, like, hey, like all these people are saying when you have all these people saying the same thing, you're trying to tell me that they're all wrong. No, they're not. And yeah, I would say it's changing minds, but is Gary Bettman reading our book? I don't think he will, because I don't think he will, but he probably should. So I go all that to say, like, the people that need to read the most, who are stakeholders and who are people that can actually enact change and have a weight behind their name, they probably aren't reading it.
Yeah, someone once told me to send a copy to USA Hockey, and I was like, yeah, they hate me. That's never gonna happen. So I know a lot of people in college hockey who bought the book, and it's kind of awkward because I have like people at BU who are like buying it. One of the commissioners who recently retired bought it for one of the coaches who I gave a copy to because I've known him for a really long time. And I've had people kind of just call me and be like, what's in it? Because they're like worried that I like crucify people. And I'm like, you guys got to chill. So I think a big part of my hope is that kind of trying to get players younger. So like I have people I know who like work with teams who are like, all right, I'm gonna read this on the bus because I hope that like the kids will ask about it or like something like that. And I know from like some of the players that I've talked to, like they kind of believe that they can be a changing force because they're just not going to put up with a lot of the bullshit that happens right now. So I'm kind of hoping that like through that, like the coaches kind of buy into this. Like that's a big thing. Like the coaches at college hockey level will have to buy into it because they shape the way their players will end up, especially if their players are young. So that's kind of my hope. I don't know if it's had an impact. I don't know. Kind of suspicious. I haven't heard anything back from anyone. I might have pissed some people off. My bad.
Yeah, thank you both.
Do you want us to get to Cam's question?
Yeah.
What could be a 14 East 14 East event by itself?
Yeah, talking about Barstool
Oh
Sports.
God.
Let's see. Where do I start? I mean, I've had my run-ins with them. People I know have their run-ins with them, and for me, I mean, it kind of goes back to what happened with Saroya Tinker, our front cover blurber, and that whole situation where she called. It's a typical thing what happens with Black women in feminism, where it's like, like it's it's feminism to an extent, but when other women are involved who aren't white, it's kind of like a thing where the brakes are pumped, like reflexively, and their president, like Dave Portnoy, like basically used this platform to try to shame Soria when they called them on their shit, and like it just happened. It's a tale as old as time. The New York Times called Ida B. Wells um, they had some stuff about her, and Trump said a bunch of stuff about Jamel Hill, and we're kind of seeing that now, where it's like when someone has a platform like they have, and they use it to shame people who speak out against them, and we've seen like, and also you think about things in time where like if one moment is cropping up where it's a bunch of when people see it a certain way, like for instance with ESPN, everything that was going on over there with their journalists, and then you have Barstool Sports and who they are and what they came about, and like what Cam was saying, what happened to Marissa and the people coming out with her, but yeah, I mean it's hockey hooked to, they somehow hooked themselves up with Barstool Sports, for a reason, and it's off-putting to some folks in the sport, but you also have folks who, no matter what they do, they'll live and die by these folks. And actually, Jashvina wrote more about it in the book than I did in terms of what happened with who they're hooked themselves up with and the whole girl boss phenomenon and everything else. So she can probably explain that better to me at this point.
Yeah. I hate women's hockey. I love it, but I really hate it. It's really disturbing that there are a bunch of women's hockey players who suck up to Erica Nardini because she literally, so Portnoy attacked Soroya. Soroya, stood up for herself. I can't exactly remember the timeline, but then Erica basically put like a hit video out. Like she basically like attacked a staffer, a women's hockey staffer, and a reporter. And these are people who like don't get paid for what they do, and they do it because they think it's they care, and it's for the greater good. And then you have people like fucking Amanda Kessel, who I despise with all my heart, like posting her support of Erica Nardini, and it's like, what the actual fuck is wrong with you? Like, I really hate these people because they do that. They're like, for whatever reason, obsessed with her. And women's hockey is obsessed with them, even though women's hockey fans absolutely hate them. And they are constantly attacking people within women's hockey. Like Marissa is an example. They always send their trolls to attack people, but it's like people don't, they either are 100% in support of Barstool, or they think that because they're supporting something like Spitting Chicklets, that they're not actually supporting Barstool, and they use it as like a cognitive dissonance thing. They're just terrible. And it's just made things so horrible for a lot of people. And I mean, there are just so many people who've like been in danger because of them. Like, it's horrible.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Doesn't look like it. Well, thank you everyone for coming out and for being here. I hope you all have a lovely, wonderful rest of your night. Thank you so much again to Evan and Jashvina for just all of the wonderful things you said tonight, and for helping us look beyond sports. So without further ado, we can call it.
Thank y'all. Appreciate y'all.
All right, thank you.